Okay, so for this lecture, what we're going to focus on is terminology. And as I mentioned before, and I'll probably mention again, words are the tools that we use. So the specificity and the ways of thinking that are implied by the vocabulary that we're using for academia, this is our toolbox. Okay. So if I were going to look at the tools that a chef uses, they would gladly show me their knives. If I were going to look at a carpenter, they might show me their woodworking tools. Okay, so I'm going to show you our tools. And throughout this semester, I'm going to be bringing up these different ways of presenting arguments and different methods of arguing as well. Our objectives for this lecture are to first be able to understand, explain, and use thought experiments and other tools for conceptual clarity. Want you to be able to state and apply the standards for a good moral argument and what to avoid in ethical reasoning. To be able to explain, differentiate, and apply moral principles and types of claims and values. So first thing I want to talk about is conceptual clarity. So sometimes we can just mean really good definitions to make ideas precise, okay? But there are other tools as well for conceptual clarity. So right now I'm going to use a diagram. So here I have, three circles, each circle containing a smaller circle. The smallest circle is marked with the arrow indicating too narrow. The middle circle, which contains the too narrow circle, says correct scope. And finally, the outermost one says too broad. So one of the things that analytic philosophers, which is the type of philosopher that I am, okay, meaning trained in the analytic tradition, we will use the concepts of having a concept not be too broadly defined, okay, so including things it shouldn't include, or too narrowly defined, excluding things that it shouldn't exclude. Okay, and so we wanted to be just the right scope. Okay, sometimes concepts escape this sort of simple ability to be able to describe them. Okay, but we want to understand that one of the philosophers' major tools is investigating the meaning of ethical terms in this case, and for this class, their moral import. So we'll be looking at different analytic methods. We'll be focusing on precise terminology, and we'll learn different definition types and standards. You'll find that there are thought experiments throughout, starting in this week. So for thought experiments, these are imagined scenarios that investigate the nature of things. So when we are investigating concepts, this is very different from what a natural scientist might do. A natural scientist is going to be doing, say, scientific experiments, okay? So somebody studying cancer research will have a control group, and they'll have an experimental group, and they'll try these different techniques or medicine or interventions with the experimental group. For philosophers, we're testing concepts theoretically, not practically. Okay, so we're going to test them with our minds, using the what is implied by the concepts. Okay, so just as if I was your professor in a lab class for a science class, I might tell you, well, you need to mix water with sugar. If you mix it with salt, you'd be changing the experiment. You would not be doing the experiment. Just like that, for thought experiments, do not change any aspect of the scenario when you're applying it, or you're not actually doing that thought experiment. Okay? Feel free to create your own thought experiments. This is one of the parts of philosophy that I love the most, is the creativity part, the part where you come up with your own original thought to be able to describe something that has been undescribable or indescribable prior to that for you. Make sure you use them properly and do not alter the scenario. So we're going to start with one of the most famous thought experiments. This is Philippa Foot's Trolley Problem. And so I'm going to quote this from the original article. So what you're going to do is you're going to imagine in this thought experiment, and again, sorry, hold on one sec. Okay, imagine that whatever I'm going to say is the case, okay? And in this trolley problem, this is one of the major ethical problems that is presented to bring up different problems with different theories. If you do a lot of work in the trolley problem, then you as an ethicist are called a trolleyologist, okay? So here we go. Imagine someone is the driver of a runaway tram, which he can only steer from one narrow track onto another. 5 men are working on one track and one man on the other. Anyone on the track he enters is bound to be killed. Should we say that the driver should steer for the less occupied track? So the idea here is, okay, driver, runaway train, okay, going down the track that's about to hit 5 people, okay, could switch the track to the track where there is one person, should that driver steer towards the less occupied track. So, as this entails, I want you to think about which premises are there to support which conclusion for this thought experiment. Okay, so you're going to match the reasoning to the conclusion for the original trolley problem. So A, the driver should continue on the track he is on. It will kill 5 people, but he won't have changed the track to the person who isn't already in danger. Or the driver should switch to the less occupied track, killing only 1 person. So premise number one, it is morally wrong to change the course of the train to kill a person who wouldn't otherwise be killed. 2, it's morally important, it's most important morally to save the most people. Number 3, it is one's moral duty to prevent the most harm. Number 4, killing someone deliberately is morally wrong. Number 5, letting less people die creates the most happiness. Okay, if you haven't seen this video, I've got it attached to one of your assignments, and you can watch it. But in this video, Nicholas the toddler is asked to solve the trolley problem, and he comes up with a creative solution in which he makes sure that all of them are on one, and he steers that train to kill all of them. Okay? So Nicholas the toddler chooses to move all people to get run over for the trolley problem. I want you to, as an active reflection exercise, to consider what you would say to explain to Nicholas, using simple, direct moral reasoning, why the solution is morally blameworthy and impermissible. You're going to be practicing throughout the semester how to give good arguments in ethics. So I want to be clear what moral reasoning is. Okay, I personally think of moral reasoning very simply as good decision making about human conduct. Okay, but when we are making good decisions, we have to have good reasons or sufficient reason to make the choices that we make. Okay, to make the decisions that we make. So when we are presenting that reasoning, we are presenting that in arguments. Okay, so argument, we don't mean dispute or fisticuffs or something like that. When we use this term in ethics, we mean it the way we mean it in logic class, which is an argument is a written text or uttered speech which makes a claim that particular reasons or evidence support a particular conclusion. Arguments can be evaluated as good or bad. There are standards for different arguments, okay? And those standards can be applied. The goal, ideally, a good argument preserves the truth, meaning if the premises are true, the conclusion is either necessarily for deduction or probably for induction the case. The premises are what present the evidence and or reasons. The conclusion is what is supported by the premises. A moral argument is any argument whose conclusion is about what is right or wrong, good or bad morally. Here's going to be our first argument, and if you can see in the background, it's a famous painting of the death of Socrates. Okay. So he's about to drink poison hemlock and kill himself, given that that is his fate for the crime that he has committed against Athens. So on whether he should escape or not. So right before Socrates is about to commit suicide in order to fulfill his obligations for his punishment for being impious and corrupting the children, Socrates gives an argument about why he should not just get on the boat that his friends have gotten him. He should not listen to their entreaties that he's abandoning his children to their fate. Instead, he says, look, we ought never harm anyone. If I escaped right now, I would be harming society, harming the city of Athens. Next thing he says is we ought to keep our promises. Okay, and if I escape, I'll be breaking an implicit promise I've made with this city to obey its laws and fulfill my obligations as a citizen. He says we ought to obey or respect our parents and our teachers. Likewise, if I escape, I will be essentially disobeying those who brought me up, my parents and my teachers, the city of Athens. So he concludes, giving these three different moral principles: non-maleficence, we shouldn't harm people; promise keeping, we should keep our promises; and it's important to respect our elders, those who brought us up, our parents and our teachers. So he concludes that it's wrong to escape. I want you to actively reflect on this. Is Socrates' argument morally good, or is it morally not a good argument? In other words, if the premises are true, do they support that the conclusion one should not escape is likely? So our standard for a good argument is relevant, acceptable premises, giving sufficient evidence to support the conclusion, with effective rebuttals for any known or outstanding objections. So if you're going to look at an argument and you're going to try to assess moral reasoning, here are some of the questions that you might want to start off with, okay? First, you're going to ask, if the premises are true, do they make the conclusion more likely to be true? Okay, so just as I did with the Socrates argument, okay, if those premises are all true, is it likely that Socrates would be wrong to escape? Next, are the premises true and acceptable to morally educated people around the world? Okay. So that's the acceptability clause. Do the premises focus on the most morally significant aspect? Or is there sort of a competing alternative that's obvious and that's not being dealt with and should be? Is there sufficient evidence given? Finally, is there a better argument or a countervailing theory? Is there a rebuttal that hasn't been sufficiently dealt with and really decreases the likelihood of truth preservation? Meaning, if the premises are true, that preserves the truth of the conclusion. Moral arguments have to have at least two parts. They have to have at least one moral premise and at least one non-moral premise. So they have to be, the non-moral premise is what is tied to what is actually the case, is tied to the external world, okay, internal decisions, things like that. But there also has to be at least one moral premise. There has to be a claim about morality in the premises to get to a claim about morality in the conclusion. The conclusion then must express a moral claim, that something is morally right or morally wrong or morally praiseworthy, things like that. Ideally, a moral argument gives multiple independent moral reasons that together provide sufficient support. Ideally, the facts provided come from peer-reviewed academic sources or other reliable experts in the field. Okay, so we're going to trust our experts in this class. We're going to look to our natural scientists or social scientists, people like that, to report what is the case. So here's an argument. I'm borrowing from Cicely Bach, but paraphrasing. And this is about why lying is normally wrong morally. So that's the conclusion. Here's premise one. Lying is often done for selfish momentary goals, like avoiding embarrassment, rather than what is truly beneficial. Lying is a way of gaining power over others, and desiring or enjoying that power over others through deceit is wrong. Premise three, it's wrong to act from the desire to dominate or control others, or ignore what is truly beneficial in favor of what primarily benefits the liar. Conclusion, lying is normally wrong morally. So active reflection exercise, assess this argument. First, again, we're going to start with if the premises are true, okay, then do they offer support for the truth of the conclusion? Are they true? Are these acceptable premises to moral, educated people around the world? Do they offer sufficient support? Are we missing some countervailing theory that is obvious and that we would force us to reconsider? Next, we're going to talk about moral values. Sometimes when we talk about moral principles, these will tell us what one ought to do, what one ought not do, should not, etc., permissible, impermissible. Values are going to express what's morally significant without expressing sort of often imperatives or commands. So words we might use that are moral values are words like compassion or authenticity. These are things that we value for their moral sake, for them offering ideal or good standards of human conduct. Now, when we're talking about things that are valuable, we can talk about them as either instrumentally valuable, meaning valued for the sake of another good, or intrinsically valuable, meaning valued for its own sake. Ethical norms express standards about behavior and culpability. More important, these are more important than other norms. What do I mean by that? Okay, another norm could be something like politeness, okay? But an ethical norm will override a politeness norm because doing what is right is more important than doing what is proper. Ethical norms are impartial They are universalizable, meaning that we can apply them equally to everyone in a similar situation or in every similar situation. And they are justified by moral reasoning. Normative claims state or apply these standards or norms, these best practices, ideals on how to conduct oneself well as a person. So let's talk about the principle of non-maleficence. There are many different versions. Here's one version. One should prevent as much suffering or harm as possible and should avoid desiring to harm or exert power over others. Moral principles, these are rules that guide ethical action, and they can be either absolute or dependent on circumstances. Now, descriptive claims state what is the case without giving standards of what is good or bad, permissible or impermissible. These are just simply things that are describing the world. So normative claims say what should be or should not be. Descriptive claims describe what is. Moral principles that we'll see used throughout this semester include beneficence. This is promoting the good, helping oneself and others recognize what is moral and develop oneself morally. Solidarity. This is offering of mutual support, mutual respect, and recognition of the needs and values of all. It also is about honoring communities as wholes. Justice. Justice can mean many different things. It might be a very thick concept, okay, instead of very thin, so there might be a lot to justice. We can think about just distribution, meaning ensuring equal, equitable distribution of benefits and burdens in society. But we can also think about fairness, like treating people fairly and equally. Finally, we can think about the moral principles of autonomy, wherein it's right to protect moral decision-making and protect the capacity to act upon one's free will. Avoiding coercion or coercive control. This is protecting autonomy. So I'm going to read you something. And again, this is from a real bioethics argument, rational discussion that occurred. This is during the COVID crisis. So I'm going to quote something. I want you to identify which moral principle was applied. First, we are all in this together without any question, and the health and well-being of all of us depends on our developing plans that incorporate everybody. Recognizing the distinctive needs and kinds of supports that are necessary to ensure that people in vulnerable populations are as much of a part of a health and protection plan as everybody else. Number two, look, if you're making public policy in this way, you want to maximize benefits to the population and maximize population well-being over time. Finally, it will pose an existential threat, again, not just to lives lost, but actually to our institutions and their stability. Now, for this exercise, I want you to match the type of claim to either a descriptive claim, a non-moral normative claim, so a claim that talks about norms, but not ones that are ethical norms, and then an ethical normative claim. Number one, it's normally or even always wrong intentionally to attack or kill the innocent. Number two, the average full-time college student spends an average of 19.3 hours every week working on their schoolwork. Number three, for best practices, an ideal student should spend 36 to 48 hours studying for full-time classes per week. So match which type of claim is which. I want to end by talking about what not to do in ethical reasoning. The main thing you don't want to do is you don't want to change the subject to things that aren't going to be either acceptable or to offer sufficient support. So for one thing we don't want to do is we don't want to confuse it. In particular, we don't want to conflate, meaning taking one standard and acting as if it's a different standard, as if they are the same thing. And one of the things people often do is they conflate what is ethical and what is legal, or what is legal and what is ethical. Okay, so don't do that. Something could be legal and not ethical, okay, or ethical and not legal, or I don't know if I've covered all of them, or I've started to, but there are many different ways. And I want you to actually think about this. Create your own example of the difference between an illegal and an immoral something, or a legal and a moral something. Next, just because something isn't customary in a particular society doesn't mean that it's unethical. So we don't use mere customs. Again, we can think about, we're thinking about what would be acceptable to rational, educated people around the world. And simply habits of cultures aren't enough to give reasons for it being an ethical norm. Finally, religious beliefs. Ethics and morality here is not about what a particular religion or religious authority or a particular religious text guides one to do or to not do. Okay, so again, we want to sort of make sure that we don't try to depend on a given religion in place of giving arguments that could be accepted to anybody. Not just, we can think about it not just right now, but we can think about it as arguments can continue after you die. So would this argument work in the future for future generations as well? And if you think that's a silly way to think about it, I'm going to suggest to you that a lot of the people that you're going to be reading wrote a long time ago, and you are the future generation. So I'll leave it at that.